Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is June the 24th, 2024. It has been 3,801 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 125 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years, 4 months and 1 day since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened over the weekend and Monday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. There are map changes in today's report. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian male bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. Our earlier assessment that Russia has started a second offensive with new operational goals was accurate. 2. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox. 3. Russia is setting conditions to commit further acts of aggression in Europe. 4. Russia's sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has destroyed over 80% of its combined thermal and power plant capacity, is a continuation of Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 2 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court on March 5th. 5. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March 22nd. We maintain that the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs is encouraging escalation. 6. Autocrat Putin is continuing the largest purge of the Russian Ministry of Defense led by the FSB since Joseph Stalin's 1936 to 1938 purge. 7. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine. Over the weekend, Russian attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure killed at least 11 and wounded 104. On the night of June the 21st and the 22nd, Russia apparently paid tribute to their hero Hitler's planned Barbarossa of 1941 and carried out a missile and drone attack targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. 10 Kh-101 555 cruise missiles, 2 Iskander-K ballistic cruise missiles, 4 Caliber cruise missiles from the Sea of Azov, and 13 Shahed 136 one-way drones were launched from Russia and occupied Ukraine. 7 Kh-101 missiles, 1 Iskander-K, all 4 calibers, and the 13 Shahed UAVs were intercepted, an 86% success rate. Dmytro Platenchuk, the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Navy, said the attack represented a turning point, showing that the Kremlin believes the Sea of Azov is, quote, a safer water area than the Black Sea. Ukrenergo reported critical civilian infrastructure was damaged in the Lviv and Zaporizhzhia oblasts, and 2 employees were wounded. One of the employees died, according to the head of the Zaporizhzhia military administration, Ivan Fedorov. A Russian missile struck the National Technical University of Oil and Gas in Ivano-Frankivsk, damaging 14 buildings, specialty schools, and a kindergarten, and breaking over 800 windows in apartments across the city. On Saturday morning, Russia launched 3 more Caliber cruise missiles from the Sea of Azov, targeting Kyiv. Missile debris landed in Kyiv Oblast, wounding 2 people and damaging 6 high-rise buildings and private homes. In the Kharkiv Oblast, almost a month to the day Russia bombed the epicenter hypermart in the city of Kharkiv, the VKS bombed Gagarina Avenue between the Kharkiv-Levada station and the hospital of the main department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs in the Kharkiv region. The Fab 500 bomb struck during the afternoon, with a dash camera capturing the moment of the airstrike. A security camera recorded the bombing, showing a woman caught in the blast wave. The bomb severely damaged a 5-story apartment building, 5 office buildings, 16 retail outlets, 2 pharmacies, a trolley bus, and 25 cars waiting at a traffic light. Extreme graphic photos captured the remains of 3 people who were killed instantly in the blast. One person was barely recognizable as human. The attack killed 3 and wounded 52, including 3 girls aged 12 to 17. Oleg Sinyagubov, the head of the Kharkiv military administration, reported the VKS also bombed the Holodnogirsky district, wounding 4 more and killing 1. At the time of recording, 41 were still in hospital, including 3 children. We link to numerous pictures and videos of the attack in our sitrap. There is more information on how to become a subscriber in the podcast description. Also on Saturday, a Russian drone struck a mail truck with Ukrpochta near Vovchansk, killing the driver. Yesterday, the city of Kharkiv was bombed again, with the Fab 500 striking a private school in the Shevchenkivsky district, wounding 4, including a 15-year-old. The Holodnogirsky district was also struck with at least 1 Fab 500, destroying 2 homes and a garage. 8 people were wounded, including a 16-year-old, and 1 was killed. Elsewhere in the Kharkiv Oblast, Russia shelled the villages of Glushkivka and Rublana, wounding 2 civilians. The VKS bombed the village of Milova, northwest of Izum, wounding 5 and killing 1, and a Russian drone strike on the village of Liman wounded 2. On Saturday in the Donetsk Oblast, 2 civilians were killed by Russian artillery strikes on Toretsk. Then, on Sunday, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSAFU, reported that the Detek Kurakhivska thermal power plant was shelled. Kurakhove was hit by Smerch rockets with cluster munitions, wounding 3, with 2 in hospital. The head of the Donetsk Oblast military administration, Vadim Filashkin, said the VKS bombed Selidovo with D-30S and precision bombs, wounding 5, including a family of 3. A 10-year-old is in hospital in critical condition. Russian artillery strikes on Toretsk and Zalizne wounded 2 pensioners. In Zaporizhzhia, Russian shelling of Verkhnya Tersa, northwest of Gulyai-Pole, wounded an 87-year-old woman. Over the weekend in the Kherson Oblast, Russia attacked 27 villages and settlements and the cities of Bereslav and Kherson. 9 people were wounded and 1 person was killed. On Monday morning, at least 1 Russian Kalibr cruise missile launched from the Sea of Azov struck a distribution center for groceries in the city of Odessa. Videos and pictures showed a massive fire was burning. At least 1 person was critically injured and 2 more were in serious condition. Russian claims the warehouse held ammunition are false, with pictures showing the inside of the complex while firefighting was still ongoing. Here is today's action report. Over the weekend, Russia carried out at least 398 assaults through Sunday evening, including 161 attacks on Saturday, the second highest number of daily attacks ever recorded. Through June the 22nd, the 7-day moving average increased to 142, the highest level since January the 1st. Our June the 20th assessment that a new peak would be established over the weekend was accurate. We are not happy about it. We would have preferred to be wrong. The Institute for the Study of War concluded that, quote, Russian forces appear to be intensifying the tempo of their offensive operations in Donetsk Oblast, while decreasing the rate of attacks in northern Kharkiv Oblast. And recent intensifications in Donetsk Oblast may indicate preparations for such a summer offensive, assuming it has not already begun." Unquote. This aligns with our assessment that the second phase of the Russian offensive started on June the 17th. Speaking with the United States newspaper Philadelphia Inquirer about the ongoing Russian offensive, the head of the main Defense Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov, said, quote, "The good news is that no Armageddon will emerge. The bad news is that the situation is quite difficult. It will remain like this for at least 1 month and will not become easier." When asked if Ukraine would hold Chasiv Yar, Budanov refused to answer. The Russian Officers Killed in Ukraine project reported that 4,285 officers had been killed in combat since February 24, 2022. Each name is confirmed by a Russian source using funeral notices, obituaries, new gravesites, news reports, names added to monuments, and memorial plaques. The count does not include Chechens, officers of the 1st and 2nd Army Corps of the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, and senior leaders of private military companies. Now, let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. It was a very busy weekend. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, we begin in the Lipty-Vovchansk area of operation, or AO. Fighting continued in Vovchansk with no significant change in the situation. Russian sources shared a video showing thermobaric rockets striking the apartment blocks in the center of the settlement north of the machine aggregate plant, where Russian forces remain surrounded. East of Vovchansk, the VKS bombed the village of Tykhe. Russian mercenary blogger Gonzo reported that Ukrainian forces remained on the offensive and fighting continued in Hlyboke. In the Belgorod region of Russia, the Ukrainian Air Force used JDAM glide bombs to strike a regimental command post for Russian forces in Nikhoteivka, destroying the compound. A Pantsir S-1 air defense system was also destroyed north of the settlement of Dobovoye. In the Kupiansk AO, Russian forces continued their attacks in the direction of Sinkivka and Stepovano-Vasilivka with no change in the situation. In the Svatovo AO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued their attacks east of Stelmachivka and attempted to advance in the direction of Kopanki from occupied Sergeyivka. In the Crimea AO, Russia carried out attacks in the direction of Makiyivka, the hamlet of Novosadove, Nevske, Terny, and in the Serebryanka woods. There were no changes in territorial control that we can share at this time. Let's talk about the Donbass and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. Over the weekend in the Siversk AO, fighting intensified. Russian forces made another attempt to advance in the direction of Verkhnyokamyansk from Zolotarivka, suffered losses and retreated to their defensive positions. Russian attempts to advance deeper into Spirne and in the direction of Vyemka were also unsuccessful. Russian troops raised a flag in the center of the village of Ruzdolivka. We adjusted the map and coded the settlement as occupied. Heavy fighting continued on the northern outskirts. In the Kostiantynivka AO, fighting restarted west of Bogdanivka. A very graphic geolocated video showed that Russian forces had advanced up to 300 meters into Kalinivka and were suffering heavy losses in the village. Wogonza reported that fighting continued on the eastern edges of the canal district of Chasiv Yar with no change in the situation. GSAFU reported that 5 assaults on the western edge of Ivanivske, near Klishchiivka, and in the direction of Andriivka were repulsed. In the Toretsk-New York AO, Russian forces made tactically significant gains, capturing Shumy, the Ukrainian defensive positions east of Pivnichne, and advanced into Pivdenne, capturing the gas compressor station and waste dump number 1. Frustrated field officers accused their command of mismanaging a troop rotation, enabling Russian forces to capture the first line of defense east of Toretsk. In our assessment, Russia is setting conditions to sever the ground lines of communications, that's GLOC or supply lines, that support Kostiantynivka. This would make the continued defense of New York, Toretsk and Chasiv Yar extremely difficult. It would account for Russia's attritional warfare east of Chasiv Yar, meant only to hold Ukrainian troops in place. In the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, the heaviest fighting continues to be in the Avdiivka AO, where Russian forces carried out at least 86 assaults during the weekend. Most of the assaults were in the areas surrounding occupied Ocheretine and Arkhangelsk. Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Alexandropol were unsuccessful, while Russian forces made additional gains into western Novoalexandrivka. Ukrainian source Deep State assessed that the settlement had been captured, with GSAFU and the command of the 110th Mechanized Brigade denying the claim. Quote, "The Deep State resource published information about the alleged complete occupation by the enemy of the settlement of Novoalexandrivka in the Pokrovsky direction. Later, this news was picked up and published on their resources by a number of media. The specified information regarding the complete occupation by the enemy of the settlement of Novoalexandrivka is not valid." Unquote. We maintained the settlement is contested while recording a Russian advance in the direction of Vozdvizhenka. Fighting continued in the area of Novopokrovsk, the directions of Novoselivka-Persha and Yevgenivka, and on the eastern edges of Sokil, where Russian forces continued to suffer major losses. The Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade continued its defense, attacking Russian troops with Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. A 4-minute Russian video showed what it is like traveling west from the occupied Avdiivka coke plant on the T-542 highway. The T-542 is littered with destroyed infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, UAZ-452 loaves, and trucks. The Ukrainian 68th Yaga Brigade repulsed Russian attempts to advance northwest of Umansk. Russian mercenary mill blogger Wogonza reported fighting had moved back into Yasnobrodivka without evidence. We cannot accurately assess the situation in Kharkivka, with different reports from Russian and Ukrainian sources. There has been no evidence of a successful Russian wet crossing into the center of the settlement. To the southwest, Russian attempts to re-enter the village of Nevelske ended in failure. Fighting continued in the Vuhledar AO, where Russia has shifted to light infantry assaults supported by artillery in Krasnohorivka. The Ukrainian 46th Air Mobile Brigade reported, quote, "The enemy practically stopped airstrikes on Krasnohorivka, now working in the city only with artillery. We are observing a change in the tactics of the occupiers. They tried to achieve their goals with a sudden surge of infantry and equipment without prior air support." A geolocated video of Russian forces being attacked by drone-delivered IEDs confirmed a small Russian advance in the southwestern part of the settlement. The map was adjusted. Near Georgievka, the 46th Brigade repulsed a Russian assault, destroying 7 armored vehicles and taking 4 soldiers prisoner. Fighting continued in Paraskoviivka with no change in the situation. There were no reports of significant fighting in the Vremivka AO from Ukrainian or Russian sources. In occupied Novodonetsk, a Russian logistics base with ammunition was bombed by Ukraine. The farm hangars still had bags of abandoned ammonium nitrate fertilizer, which exploded, obliterating the site. There is a video. Another video showed catastrophic Russian equipment losses on the approaches to Urozhaine. In occupied Mariupol, the second Russian tanker carrying diesel fuel arrived in the port, indicating that Russia is using ships to maintain the military fuel supply after the loss of the railroad ferries at Kerch.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com@malcontentnews.
Fighting restarted in the Orikhiv, but remained light. 4 Russian attacks on Malatokmachka were repulsed, and a Russian attack on Robotine failed. A very graphic video showed dozens of dead Russian soldiers. Near occupied Burchak, a Russian troop formation was hit by an M30 rocket with submunitions fired by HIMARS. In occupied Dniprorudne, a Ukrainian airstrike destroyed a building occupied by Russian troops. The International Atomic Energy Agency provided an update on the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Energodar was left without power for 16 hours after the second electrical substation in the city was destroyed. Russian occupiers claim that the Raduga substation was hit on Friday night. Director General Rafael Grossi said, quote, "Whoever is behind this, it must stop. Drone usage against the plant and its vicinity is becoming increasingly more frequent. This is completely unacceptable, and it runs counter to the safety pillars and concrete principles which have been accepted unanimously." IAEA staff was permitted to inspect the Raduga substation and reported that there were no signs of oil leaks or fire, and it was less damaged than the Luch station, which was hit by a drone last week. The outages did not impact the external power connections to the NPP. In the Kherson AO, GSAFU reported that 5 Russian attacks on Ukrainian positions on the left banks of the Dnipro and Konka rivers were repulsed. In occupied Kherson Oblast, the previously undocumented wreck of a Russian Su-25 was found. The aircraft was likely shot down in late 2023 or early 2024, based on the state of the debris and vegetation growth. There was a lot that happened in the Black Sea and occupied Crimea. On Sunday, in occupied Sevastopol, Russian air defenses shot down 5 ATACMS missiles. One of the missiles was hit near Saki military airfield, just offshore of Uchkuivka beach, which was full of tourists. Debris from Russian Tor air defense systems, the ATACMS rocket and submunitions landed in the water and on the beach. Occupation officials claimed 124 people were wounded, including 27 children, with 5 killed. Air raid sirens didn't start until after the strike and prior to the explosion, and Russian aircraft at Belbek military airfield were scrambled to avoid the incoming attack. Russian state media agency Shot, quoting an eyewitness, reported that many of the injured were swimming. Quote, "The people who suffered the most were those who were swimming in the sea at the time of the impact and were not far from the water. Most suffered leg injuries." The Russian Ministry of Defense initially reported, quote, "During the repulsion of the terrorist attack, 4 US-made ATACMS missiles were shot down by the on-duty air defense units. Another missile deviated from its flight path due to the impact of air defense systems at the final stage, with its warhead exploding in the air above the city." Unquote. Someone at the Kremlin said, "Blyat, this means we contributed to the wounded. This must be changed." An hour later, a rewrite blamed the United States for the attack. Quote, "Responsibility for the strike on civilians in Sevastopol lies primarily with the United States, whose specialists introduce flight missions to American missiles." Unquote. And further claimed that Ukraine, with US help, intentionally targeted the beach. Many Russian propagandists questioned why air raid sirens were never activated, why a beach so close to a military airfield was open, and why there were no bomb shelters. I would add why those Russians were on Ukrainian soil in the first place, but that's too sober a question for Russian propagandists. Last night, Ukraine used ATACMS missiles to strike the Russian 40th Separate Command and Measuring Complex, the NIP-16 Long-Range Space Communications Center in occupied Vytino. Multiple sources confirmed the attack, but the extent of the damage is unknown. Satellite images confirmed that after burning for 4 days, 3 of the 6 storage tanks at the fuel depot at Port Azov in the Rostov region of Russia were destroyed. It took 4 days to extinguish the fire. On Monday morning, the Black Sea Fleet had 7 ships on patrol. 1 was in the Black Sea and 7 were in the Sea of Azov, including 2 frigates capable of launching 16-caliber cruise missiles. Yes, Russia says Ukrainians defending themselves from a documented genocide are terrorists, but we found real terrorism in Russia. In the Russian Republic of Dagestan, Al-Azaim Islamic militants claimed responsibility for terrorist attacks in the cities of Derbent and Makhachkala. In Derbent, terrorists fired on a church and a synagogue, burning the Jewish house of worship to the ground. 66-year-old Russian Orthodox priest Nikolai Kotelnikov died after the militants slit his throat. The Rosgvardia was deployed, with fighting continuing through the day. At the time of recording, Russian sources claimed the situation had been brought under control. In the capital city of Makhachkala, police units were ambushed and gun battles were fought in the streets. Militants spray-painted Tu-120 on the only synagogue in the city, a reference to the Quran, before setting the building on fire. The head of the Sergokalinsky district, Magomed Amarov, was taken into custody after police identified 2 of the Islamic terrorists as his sons, Osman and Adil, both killed by security forces. Russian state media agency Baza denied Amarov was arrested, but his page had already been removed from Putin's United Russia Party website. Russia announced a counter-terrorism operation, with the Ministry of Internal Affairs sealing off the city of Makhachkala as gunfire continued. War Gonzo claimed that fighting had spread to the village of Sergokala, where police transporting Magomed Amarov were allegedly ambushed. At least 15 police officers were killed and another 27 wounded. The dead included the commander of the Dagestan Lights Police Department, Lieutenant Colonel Mavludin Khidirnabiev, who was killed during the fighting in Derbent. 7 civilians were injured, and Russian officials claimed 6 militants were dead. The Islamic State Khorasan, better known as ISKP or inaccurately as ISIS, issued a statement on Telegram praising the attack, quote, carried out by Islamic State members of the Caucasus. On the border of the occupied Georgian Republic of Abkhazia and Russia, gunmen opened fire at the border crossing at the Psou River. At least 1 person was killed and 3 were wounded. Russian officials believe the attack is connected to the terrorist strikes in Derbent and Makhachkala. It was the worst Islamic-backed terrorism in Russia since the Moscow Crocus City Hall was attacked on March the 22nd, killing at least 137. Chechen warlord and aspiring dentist Ramzan Dondon Kadyrov condemned the attack, and several prominent Russian propagandists broke ranks with the Kremlin, warning against blaming Ukraine or the West. In Rostov-on-Don, insurgents with Atesh sabotaged railroad relay cabinets on the line between the Russian city and occupied Mariupol. And finally, pictures and satellite images confirm that the June the 21st drone strike west of Yeysk military airfield in Krasnodar Krai destroyed a Shahed 136 storage and logistics base. Here is my theater-wide update. Ukraine has received an experimental AM General Hawkeye for field testing in combat conditions. The Hawkeye is a mobile 105mm howitzer with a range of 11 to 15 kilometers. The Financial Times reported that Ukraine had received over $850 million in ammunition from Serbia, which was purchased by third-party nations and then transferred to Ukrainian troops. Dutch Minister of Defense Kajsa Ollongren said that the Netherlands and another unnamed country will be able to supply another Patriot battery to Ukraine. Earlier, Ollongren said that the Netherlands was prepared to provide radar and launchers if another country would provide the command module, power generator and additional launchers. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.